Hey guys, it's Steven and Simon from StreamPlay.io here. We're here to bring you another round of podcast. And in case you guys haven't heard of us, we have a combination of about 10 years of experience in both the eSport and the gaming industry. I've worked at Curse Inc., which is known for Curse Voice, also later sold to Twitch.tv. Worked at Bawse Keyboard, one of the best mechanical keyboard companies currently in the gaming industry. I was a professional gamer for about 2 years for StarCraft 2 under one of the international teams called Fnatic, probably one of the biggest franchises. Simon, would you want to introduce a little bit about yourself?
Hey guys, the start of my experience in the gaming industry, I was contending at, say, some of the high-level World of Warcraft arena tournaments, 3 versus 3, managed to get into the top, I would say top 5 in Europe at the time, and this was probably, say, 5 or 6 years back. And after that, I've been in the gaming industry working on mobile game development and also marketing. And I'm here, Stephen, now making this podcast.
Cool. So let's jump straight into it. So today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the gaming trends, the recent development of video games as a whole versus how it used to be back in the 2000s. I feel like there's quite a big contrast, especially now that even for single player games, you have to sign in, you log into an online account prior to beginning to play the game. It feels like a very big cultural kind of revolution when it comes to gaming. And I remember a few years ago, even Diablo 2, you can play offline. A lot of games you can play offline, even StarCraft. Most of these games, like Age of Empires, back in those days, Red Alert, they're all meant to be played offline, more or less. And, in this past 2 or 3 years, we've seen like an explosion of online, a massive demand of, massive online RPG games, shooter games, anything that's involves player interaction. What do you think about that, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's a massive trend towards online play. Like you said, a lot of the old games, Diablo and what have you, you could play offline by yourself as a single player. And then if you wanted to play with friends of yours, you could have a LAN party or something and invite friends to your house and they would play a multiplayer game with you, but that would still be offline. And now moving towards online, say even just a few years back, you could connect online to get extra benefits for your game. And at the same time, you could still do the single player by yourself offline. Of course, you get stuff by being online. But now, games are moving more and more towards online play, where up to the extent you cannot play the game without connecting to their servers. With some recent games I've played, such as For Honor by Ubisoft, you have to connect to their game server, even if you want to play the single campaign. You cannot complete the game or even do anything without logging online. So that's a massive step towards just being more connected.
Right, yeah. So definitely one of the very good examples I would say is Halo, for example. When I first moved to America, which was about 15 years ago, I bought Halo on the Xbox. And that was when Xbox Live was still, 12, 13 bucks, and it was very expensive. Connections were really bad. So a lot of times, we play these games, it's all about the story. It's all about having a deeper connections to the game. I remember Halo being probably one of the best games I've ever played in terms of both the storyline and the game feel itself. And that's the kind of connection you get back in the days where you just basically play through the campaign, slowly grind it out, all difficulties, bunch of different Easter eggs here and there. And compared to now, when you talk about Halo, it's more about online, the aspect of the competition side. All these kind of games. There's professional gamers I personally know that plays Halo online every single day. So it definitely feels a little different. I feel like there's more of a demand for players. The players, they're tired of interacting with NPCs, which is NPCs are just basically bots that are standardized with certain type of message based on what kind of requests you have for them. So let's say an enemy is NPC, it's programmed with a certain algorithm to act certain ways based on the situation. And players are getting they're slowly getting tired of that mentality because only the developers can only do so much to make the robots look a little more real. And I definitely can see and feel the demands. Like Star Wars Battlefront 1, Star Wars Battlefront 2, you can see a big difference in the need for people who wants to play online. When I play Battlefront 1, it's like maybe 30 versus 30 on each side, but you have all bots on each side. It's still a nice play, but when you play against players, it feels so much more engaging, so much more fun. You're part of something that's great. You're interacting, you're having fun as a community instead of as a individual player. What do you think about that?
Well, there are still really good AAA single player titles out there. I mean, they obviously have DLCs, downloadable content, and games such as Witcher 3, which is an amazing game that I've personally played through almost three times. I played through it twice. And there's games such as Fallout 4, which all have amazing gameplay, and you can get tons, I would say hundreds of hours if you want in those games. However, unlike online games, their replayability and their kind of longevity are much less than a lot of the online titles and multiplayer games that are out there now. Okay, they're really good games. You can play up to 100 hours, and with DLCs, you can play probably another 30, 50 more hours with them. But to create those DLCs, you would need to create an entirely new storyline. For example, Witcher 3 with Blood and Wine. That won an award by itself, just a DLC, and you couldn't imagine the amount of work the team would have had to put into creating that sort of thing. However, with online games, what companies need to do and what they are doing is bring out new characters, patching their games, improving their servers, balancing, rather than having to go and create an entirely new experience for players, which they did in Witcher 3 and even in Fallout 4 with DLCs. So from the company side, there's a mass difference in resource usage and also time usage when you look at multiplayer games and offline games such as Witcher. So that's one side of the story. Another side of the story, in terms of longevity or of the game, is with online games, the social aspect is a lot stronger than offline games. First of all, you have player interaction, which is a massive component of keeping games going for many years on end. And also, not only social interaction, but out of game interaction. So you have communities on Reddit, you have communities on forums, you have communities on kind of platforms where you can directly communicate with the other player through voice chat. So all these aspects build the community, and they also keep the game going on for years and years and years, while the company themselves don't have to kind of be on top of that end on end. The players are doing it themselves. And so different from the offline games such as Witcher and Fallout, online games have the benefit from this community keeping the game alive itself, and at the same time the company not having to spend as many resources as the offline game does. All they have to do is kind of develop some new characters, develop some new maps maybe, balance stuff out, patch it a bit. So, and at the same time, they probably get a much bigger return on their investment than the offline game would, in terms of not only community but also the amount of money they make in the long run. So it's worthwhile for not only the community themselves to invest in a game that has a longer lifespan and better social aspect, but at the same time, it's worthwhile for the company because they make more money and the title is more popular and has a much longer lifespan.
Right, yeah, just kind of want to follow up. Everything you mentioned so far, right, it really, really reminded me of one title. It's World of Warcraft. It's been around since early 2000s. I'm pretty sure most of us have played. If you haven't, you should definitely check it out. It's one of the legendary games that's ever made. It has to be played online, first of all, but it has both a single player and a community interactive aspect. And that's what I think make these kind of games great. The online part of interactions versus, you can go out quest alone by yourself and don't be bothered by anybody. Well, you might get killed here and there, but the whole aspect of the game is focus around interactions, focus around building the game. Every 2 or 3 years they release a new expansion of the game to keep players entertained. Kind of like you said, essentially just patching it, adding a little more stuff into the game based on the original engine. So essentially, it's more like building a building from grounds up. You're on first floor, second floor, you add a third floor next week, or fourth floor another year later, things like that. These are kind of things that are, I would say, a little bit easier to do than releasing a DLC for The Witcher 3 that would take hours of thousands, even tens of thousands of hours of work just to get the player set right, get people to buy in your story. I feel like that's even harder than, let's say, per se, Hearthstone right now just released a new expansion of cards. They don't actually write stories about these things. They just release cards and here you go. It's a lot easier for them to do as well. I want to take a little bit back, talk about online games a little bit, since we kind of bash a little bit too much on the traditional games. Just online games in general, there's pros. Like we said, the game itself lasts a long time. The franchise lasts a while. If it's popular, it'll become more popular. It will take a long time for it to die out. Even World of Warcraft, since it came out in 2000s, it's still going pretty well. They're generating tens of millions of dollars per month just based on their monthly subscription system. So I want to talk a little bit about online, the interactions, and why it can be negative towards some players. Like traditional players, traditional gamers, I feel if you're in your 20s, late 20s, 30s, you probably wouldn't enjoy the online aspect as much due to maybe some sort of harassment, toxicity, things like that. When you interact with people online, it's not like you're interacting with an NPC. They're not always going to have a standard set of commands. Maybe they will respond negatively or positively, but you will never get hurt because it's a computer. But players have, especially behind screens, have been doing a lot of cyberbullying. So like people like us, if we're interacting with someone who's 15, 16 years old, we probably will have a very hard time convincing them that the behaviors they're doing are inappropriate, just because first of all they're young, and second of all they're online behind a computer. You can't catch them. So it's kind of a little bit of frustration, I feel like, for a older generation gamer to adopt into the multiplayer online kind of scene.
Well, I think a big difference in terms of mindset between the older generation and, say, the younger generation that are in their teens or early adulthood, and the gamers that are, say, in their late 20s, even mid 20s, or in their 30s, 40s. The people that are older, generally, when they play a game, they perhaps go for the story aspect. They want to be able to complete the game. They want to kind of look into the lore, the history of the game. Perhaps it's an ongoing title that has a story going on from the first game to the second game to the third. So that's one of the big elements that I would say the older generation, or not even old, but not young generation gamers are looking for. Whereas the younger generation, they're okay with kind of, well, obviously they like a good story told, but that's not their main thing they're chasing. They kind of look at what is kind of popular on the market, and they want to be the best at that game. If they are a very committed gamer, they want to be the best at that game. They look at what is the most popular on the market: League of Legends, Dota, Overwatch, among many other games, and they compete. They're very competitive, which is how we were, and say, when we were young. Rather than playing games, we were competitive in sports. So we want to be the best at sports, whereas younger gamers now, they want to be the best at whatever game is popular. So there's a different mindset to there. So again, recap: older generation, they go for the story, whereas younger generation, they're more competitive and they want to be the best at their game. Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger points that I want to talk about.
Right, yeah. So kind of take it a little step back, recap what you just said. Essentially, I agree with everything you said so far, but I also think that the older generation of people like us and a little bit older, I feel like people like us, we just simply don't have the time to play.
Yeah,
and we're quote unquote dying out slowly. And I feel like as we all age, we'll be gamers for life, but we won't have a lot of time to play. And then the younger generation, like you said, they're competitive. They have a shorter attention span. They want to get things done fast. They like to be able to play a game over and over again, not be tired of it. And the online games right now offer this kind of feel to it. And to them, it's more important for and by them I mean the developers of games. They're looking at the demographics, they're looking at the stats, they're looking at how old people are, what kind of games, how much time they spend, and I'm pretty sure that the trend itself is due to a younger generation coming in, to their likings, to their tastes, as to why there are more online games made compared to, let's say, a game like Total War. It's very, very theme based, it's very storyline heavy, it's very older generation kind of games versus what you see now, which is fast paced Overwatch, Counter Strike, Heroes of the Storm, League of Legends, games like that. These things are really fast paced versus something that maybe even like switch of genre of back in the days where real time strategy was more or less a big hit. You can see like a very drastic change in terms of the directions where the developers wants to go. So I would say in conclusion, I personally feel that the single player games are slowly dying out, even though it's still there. There's still companies that are holding on. These companies are monopolizing all the money essentially. But the online interaction, the extra dimension of interaction, the social part is what will drive the games going from this point on.
Yeah, just to add, like to what you're saying, I agree completely. The community is demanding shorter games, faster sessions, and everything, and at the same time, the developers are satisfying that need. If you look at League of Legends at the start, and also for Dota to some extent, if you look at the start for say season one, the average game span per game was probably around 40 to 50 minutes. Whereas if you look at each game now, it's on average around 20 to 30 minutes per game. So the time of each game has dropped from 40 to 50 minutes to 20 to 30 minutes, which is a huge drop in terms of time. So, and even if you look at mobile games now, let's think of one. Clash Royale, yeah, Clash Royale.
One, yeah.
The game sessions are sometimes less than 3 minutes, and at most they're probably 5 minutes with extended time. So all games are looking at shorter sessions to satisfy the needs and craves of the younger people.
So would you say this is good or bad? In terms
For
of
me,
game
it's
trends?
not a huge deal. I mean, I play fast-paced games. I play Overwatch. I play League of Legends from time to time. But I also really like offline games where I'm able to kind of play by myself, relax, and just enjoy the story.
Cool, yeah. So now that we talked a lot about games and the ways games are changing, we actually mentioned quite a bit about esports, quite a few titles like Dota, League of Legends, Hero Storm, Hearthstone, such. Let's talk a little bit about how games actually become esports. How did it come, by the way, Simon?
Well, the main difference I would say between a game that is an esport and a game that is an esport is that the one that is an esport is more competitive in nature, and at the same time, something that's also as important is that it has a big enough social following or social factor, uh, meaning that there's enough people that play competitively, and at the same time, there are enough people that want to watch it, and at the same time, aspire to be competitive and really good at the game. So both of these factors are very important. The game not only needs to be developed competitively, but also the community needs to have the same kind of spirit.
Do you feel like games are accidentally become esports? Dating back to the earliest esport game title that I would think of is Counter Strike and StarCraft Brood War. So these are the titles that were meant to be played mostly offline, I would say. Counter Strike may be a little bit different, but these are the two titles that I feel that were made to become esports. Even though the concept of esports didn't exist back in the days, there were competitions more or less. So would you say this is more like an accident or anything?
Well, I wouldn't say it was an accident. I would say that it's more something that was meant to be. A lot of these games, by nature, they all had a very they had a skill element to them, and with that skill element came different kind of brackets of players. People that played it to a beginner level, obviously, with the majority of players when they start the game, they're a beginner level, and people that played it to an intermediate level, people that played it to a high level. So, meaning they're probably in the top, I would say, 10% of players if you're at a high level. And then people that played it to a professional level, which is what the level of our today's professional esports players are at. And at that stage, you're probably in the top 0.05% of the players. And that's not, there's still people in that 0.05% or even less that are actually not esports players, but really competitive. So at the end of the day, the game needs to be a skill, have a very strong skill factor. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to have a very strong skill factor, but there needs to be one. And at the same time, there needs to be players that are competing at all levels, not necessarily the highest level, but you need to have people at the highest level to bring it to the stage of an esports.
Yeah, I feel like you're missing a little bit of my points here. Essentially, I was asking you whether if these games came to become esports eventually by itself. You know, it's definitely, I feel it's a little bit faded in a way. But I also feel like if we go back a few years ago, let's say 10 years ago, if we talk about esports, people will probably laugh at you. If you say you're an esports competitor, people will probably laugh at you because one, they don't really know what it is, and two, it wasn't popular. I feel personally from a esports competitive background, I feel that for a game to become, let's say per se, esports, it has to have quite a few factors. You know, the popularity is one thing, competitiveness is definitely another thing, and I feel like a lot of luck is involved when it comes to making a game into esport. Blizzard probably never had the intention of making their game StarCraft 1 into esport, even though, you know, it did become an esport and ultimately has a really high skill cap. But the skill cap is due to all the glitches, all the exploits, the small things you can do that requires so much extra manual work to give you an advantage that it became competitive itself. I know Counter-Strike by nature probably had the intention of interaction from the very beginning between players, and it's difficult to shoot, you know, shoot a gun, and everybody can understand that. But for StarCraft, I feel like it's the first introduction to foreigners, to everybody, from South Korea, that esport can be a competitive scene, it can be monetized, it can be franchised and such. So yeah, I guess the question wasn't really well asked for you, is whether games from the very beginning, did games start off to be accidents before they became esports?
Okay, like, I think I understand now. I guess so. The happening of esports was an accident to some extent, but like I said before, I think it's something that was more meant to be. It was going to happen no matter what at some stage. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I was, I believe why it was going to happen no matter what is because I was reading an article this week that was talking about the skill element in games. And the skill element in games is what makes a competitive game and is what I believe drives games to becoming an esport game. And what I read in the article was that skill-based games generally have a greater longevity, but also at the same time, they make more money basically, and they last a lot longer, and they have a better community backing at the same time. So I'm sure the companies that develop these games noticed this. They noticed that skill elements in games, especially skill elements in multiplayer games, are a big thing. And they emphasized this in the games they made thereafter. And also, when they patched the game, they emphasized the skill factor, which over time evolved into what is now esports, as players discovered this newfound increasing skill factor, and after time this eventually became what we know as esports. And of course, like I was saying before, there's also varying levels of skill. when players started out in the game, or at the very beginning, you had to just basically, okay, if you're in a shooter game, you just got to start out. If you're beginner level, you just know how to move, you know how to shoot. Okay, great. When you're at a higher level, you have to know how to shoot, know how to move, know what the other player is going to do.
Strategies, yeah.
Yeah, you got strategies. At an advanced level of play, beyond the intermediate level, you have to work as a team. You have to know how your team is going to react. You got to predict how your other team will react, and while at the same time doing all those basic things to a high level of play. So there's a lot of factors, and then at the highest level, all of these become basic things you do by instinct, while your team as a whole and also as an individual player, you excel beyond what is basic. So with the development from the game company, with the development of the skill side from the game company, and also with the development of the skill side from the player, I believe it's a two-factor thing that brought about esports.
Right, definitely. So that kind of definitely reminds me of sports in general. You know, you can practice by yourself, practice with teammates. You see people at the NBA, NFL. These guys are pros. Nobody can actually touch them. They think like they basically think like the way you just described them. Just everything's acting on instinct. There's little to no mistake. There's still mistakes, but these players are probably playing to as much perfection as they can to a sport. I just kind of want to mention a little bit more about. You know, you talk about the player base, the popularity. We mentioned a little bit back in the previous discussion today that you know games are becoming shorter. Like the way people get their attentions to play games. You know, when you play, let's say basketball, baseball, traditional sports, you can spend 2 minutes playing. You can spend 3 hours playing. You can spend as much time as you want. That's the kind of games that are going right now that are becoming esports. You have basically a minimum amount of times, maybe 10 minutes of commitment, 20 minutes of commitment. You can leave whenever you want to. You can stop playing whenever you want to. The only part is it's a game, so it's forcing you to play in certain modes that might have multiple players. So other players might be affected. However, it's kind of the trend right now for games to become esports. It has to have a good player base. It has to have a good community. The game has to be more or less similar to a sport where it's either a team competing, individual competing, and then there has to be a large audience, has to have a high skill cap, like everything you said. But also, there's quite a few things that I feel like that gaming companies are doing more to stand out more or less. Because right now, let's say there's a lot of titles that are esports, quote unquote esport. Dota, League of Legends, StarCraft, Heroes of the Storm, Hearthstone, Overwatch, Counter-Strike. These are the main titles. And everybody trying to mimic I think Rocket League will be the next one too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so everybody's trying to mimic this kind of model where it's, 5v5, 3v3. So titles such as Smite, Vainglory, even Clash Royale, these games have a very big potential of becoming esports. They're similar to like the MOBA scenes, very simple, very straightforward, very much like League of Legends and Dota 2, but these titles, they don't do really well because their community is relatively small. There's major teams out there. If you ever heard of Fnatic, Evil Geniuses, these are top tier premium teams around the world. If these teams don't evolve, they're not involved in these scenes, the scene itself won't grow just because the viewers won't follow the team to this type of games.
Yeah, I think you've got one of the major points here is like, traditionally, if you just look at sports, for example, traditionally they have been team-based games, basketball, football, American football. Those are the games that have the biggest following and viewership on TV, on whatever sort of platform. And then again, it's the same with esports games. You need to look at the games that have the biggest, the ones with the biggest following are the team-based games, which are League of Legends, Dota, and now up and coming Overwatch. They are team-based games rather than single-player games such as you've mentioned Clash Royale on mobile, and also other games such as
StarCraft 2 a little bit.
2,
even
yeah.
It is an esport, but
Yeah.
yes, it's Accession.
It probably isn't as big as it was back in the day before League of Legends and other games got more popular. And again, like single-player games, you have sports which are not as popular but still popular, which are watched on TV, such as golf, maybe tennis, again, those games are single player and not team games and not as popular as football. So it's the same like in esports. And also, like you were saying, new games coming out or games that are not as old as League of Legends, such as Smite, such as Vainglory, such as Rocket League. They all have skill elements to them, and they are team games, a lot of them. But they're like they don't like you said they don't have as big as a social following. They don't have as big as a community. So that aspect is not good. It's like in sports again. I was watching this sport the other day, and it's been around for quite a while, where you have there's a game. It's basically basketball but with trampolines. So it's a new game that's coming out. It has a following, but it's not as famous as basketball, because basketball has, obviously, they're both team games, but basketball has a much bigger following. It's more established. It has its famous people in there, like esports. It has its famous teams. It has its most famous people individually as gamers for that game that they like and play and watch. So that's also one aspect. So the team element and the community. And I think another element that I'm not sure if we tapped on, is one thing is the low entry barrier of the game. So it has a low entry barrier, not saying that it is a low skill game, but that people can start and play the game very easily. And also at the same time, something that's just as important as the low entry barrier is for the people that watch it, it's easy for them to understand what is happening, even at a high level as a viewer. So the casters are able to explain that quickly and using a simple language to the viewer, to the audience. And at the same time, not only the talking is understood, but also when the viewers are watching it, they are able to understand it themselves easily, no matter if they're a current gamer of the game or if they're not a gamer but know of the game. So the entry barrier is also one element, but also the people that are watching it, it should be easy to understand and comprehend.
Okay, so you're saying basically the esport for games to become esports, they had to be more team focused rather than what I was following up was more about franchise.
Mm-hmm.
How there's already established franchises out there that are not developing tapping into certain games because they don't see much of a potential. But you're saying that games need to be focused more on just the teamwork, just having the element of teamwork involved to become esports.
Yes, that's definitely a big thing. And so there's one thing that we haven't talked about. So is esports making money?
See, that's a real question, right? Like, why do we even talk about games that want to be esports? It's really because esport itself seems like a really lucrative market. I think you mentioned previously that esports was about 600-700 million in terms of the industry itself, and its potential to grow to about 1.1 billion by 2019 or so.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. It's really big news. It's different from sports. It's people playing games. You're targeting a different set of audience. The viewers right now, the people that watches esport are very young, 15, 16 to 18, not even to us, 25, 26, fairly normal. It's a fairly new market, fairly intricate. It's very hard to get into it. If you're a sportcaster, let's say, it's very hard for you to come into esport and become a personality, become in the scene, just because the way the influences work here is quite different. So is esports making money? That's a very hard question to say. I remember reading about Riot a year or two ago on their esports stance, and they're actually losing quite a bit of money. Just think about this. They're paying each player about 100K a year. Let's say you have 100 players around the world. That's $10 million. That's absolutely ridiculous. And 100 players is only, like, if you think about it, it's a 5v5 game. So 100 players, only 20 teams. They're definitely paying more than that. And then on top of just paying salaries to players, paying salaries to casters, paying salary for production, for the venue, to setting things up, the marketing, everything involved in esport, they're paying a fortune. And that's on top of them paying for their prize pools, which are nowadays one of the more focus for esports than anything. It's how much prize money is involved in each of the major tournaments. I feel 2 or 3 years ago, you can say 50K is a lot. 50K is quite a bit of money. 100K, it's incredible. But nowadays, if you're just any sort of major tournament, not even like the biggest one in the whole fiscal year, 1 million is not considered that much anymore. And that's ridiculous to think about. You know, League of Legends, they pay out their players really, really well. I know they recently adopted Dota's way of using the compendium, which allows players to purchase like kind of sort of a skin kind of thing as part of a fundraising towards the prize pool and towards the making of the production of the final of the World Series. And this definitely helps them a little bit, but I still think if you're a game, especially a game developer, you're looking at eSport as a whole, you are not making too much money, especially as Riot that does its own production. Riot's the only company, in fact, that does all of its own productions. They don't use anybody else. I think a few years ago they used ESL, but they're not really using them anymore. They're doing everything by themselves, and these are the challenges that you'll start to face if you're a developer. You're trying to get things done by yourself. Unlike, let's say, Dota 2, they're doing a lot of stuff by themselves, but a lot of the majors are done by, let's say, DreamHack, StarLadder, ESL. These are the top three biggest European, CIS, and North America region game event host organizers. And these guys have been doing it for years. They're probably making a good amount of money just through sheer sponsorship. Oh yeah, that's the one thing I want to talk about as well. Esports and sponsorship. That's where most of the money is right now. Essentially, let's say your hardware, gear, let's say your computer, you sell computers, you sell mechanical keyboards, you sell mice, anything that's gaming related. Even a game. Game probably not as much because esports is really focused more on the accessories. You know, if you're, let's say, if you're watching somebody play basketball, you won't see an ad about people playing American football. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to them that you can see you were watching, you know, LeBron James play, and all of a sudden you see Tony Romo from the Dallas Cowboys. That's those kind of stuff doesn't really make sense. The celebrity endorsements, everything, it doesn't target the audience well. And this is the same thing here, where you don't really advertise games. You advertise more on the peripherals, like Nike shoes would be a good example versus the keyboard that we usually get for our computers. And the sponsorship can range anywhere. It has a really large variety of range when it comes to price. So let's say if you want to sponsor a tournament, a major tournament, it will be about 200K very easily just for one sponsorship. And typically with major tournaments and such, they usually have about 10 to 20 sponsorships. So let's say that's about $2 to $4 million from the sponsorships alone, and that's only for events. We haven't even touched base on teams, individual players. Some players, if you want to put a icon onto the TV that the audience sees, for this particular player, it might cost you $50,000, $60,000 a month. But I mean, they're definitely making the returns. There's no reason to do this if the sponsors, the company's not making money. So they're still definitely making money. They're getting the brand recognitions, and that's where a lot of money is. So is eSport making money? Maybe not the game itself. The players are, the sponsors are making money. It's more the third parties that are making most of the money. Right now, what esports are becoming is they're trying to franchise it to the point where branding is the biggest thing to them. They don't really care about losing money. Let's say if you have 30, 40 million player base per month playing your game, you're not going to care about losing a little bit of money in exchange for branding. A good example would be Snapchat. They've been losing money since forever ago, even though their net worth is about 2 billion, even more probably. So why would the companies as such, you know, continue to lose money but continue to operate? It's because they want to establish their branding, because it's more valuable to do something as such, especially for eSport, it's really new. It's not even recognized as a sport in the US, except I think Russia would be the one that's recognized. So when you think about it, the economy of it is definitely still in the infrastructure. You're not expected to make money as a game developer or game publisher, but it helps you establish a solid footing. Like branding is the most important aspect of eSport at the moment.
In relation to the money that you're talking about in esports, I think there's also one thing that I'd like to touch on a bit. It's the players, it's the people that are part of the teams that are wanted to come into this industry. They are making esports happen as much as the companies and also the sponsors that are giving the money. These competitors, these players, like our professional sports players today, they are brought up in a world where they're wanting to become famous people. They want to become popular, like the sports people. They're taking a risk, but at the same time, they also have the ambitions to be the best. They want to make a lot of money, which is one aspiration, but at the same time, do something they enjoy a lot and be famous, celebrities to some extent. So this is something new that I think is also very significant in esports. The player attitude is very similar to what we see in sports. They love the game, they want to be a celebrity to some extent, and also they want to make money, which is also a big factor. And there is a lot of money to be made in esports and will only get more and more. So I think that's something that's also very interesting.
Right. Who would not want to play games and make money? I think that's the dream of every boy, girl, child, whoever.
Yeah, every athlete
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
doing what they love to do.
Cool. Yeah. So with that said, let's wrap it up a little bit, especially for esports. I know we talk a lot about it, how games become esports, how it's going right now. So what would you say to esport? Like what do you think about esport in the next few years?
Esports in the next few years, well, with the 2019 $1.1 billion prediction, I guess it's going to be a lot more than that. More investments are coming in, so it's going to be even more valuable than what it's estimated to be. There's going to be more competition. The entry barrier is going to be higher for the new people coming in, and there will be more games to watch if you're interested in exploring more games. And yeah, a lot of rivalries between individual players and teams.
Yeah, so definitely I agree with you on every keynote there. I definitely think games might one of the issues you might run into is that games might die out, but I feel like if the developers are paying attention, which the bigger ones are definitely following through with esports, making sure their branding is established, their games won't die out for the next few years. They'll even if that game Dota 2 dies out, Dota 3 will come out, Dota 4 will come out. It will be a continuous process of ongoing of an ecosystem with esports. So with that said, let's conclude the rest of today and. Again, thank you guys for tuning in to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on esports and games in general. It's been a pleasure, me and Simon from StreamPlay.io. And if you guys have any feedback, if you have any questions or anything that you want us to cover, definitely let us know. We'll try to get it in next time.
Yeah.
All right, see you guys next time.
See you guys.